Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence by Anna Lembke, MD. Picture this. A man in his early 60s walks into a psychiatrist's office wearing the Silicon Valley starter pack, khakis, and a button-down shirt. He looks like he could be anyone's dad, like someone who'd help you fix your computer, not someone harboring dark secrets. Dr. Anna Lembke could practically taste his anxiety as she led him down the hallway to her office. She gestured to a chair and watched his eyes dart around the room, scanning her diplomas, her bookshelves, landing briefly on a small clay angel with one word carved into its base: courage. She started with her standard opening, "What can I help you with?" The man, let's call him Jacob, studied her face for a moment. "I was hoping," he said, his thick Eastern European accent making each word careful and deliberate, "you would be a man." Dr. Lembke had been doing this long enough to know exactly where this was heading. Sex. It was always about sex when they started like this. She assured him she'd heard just about everything the human experience had to offer. He shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on his shoes. "You see, I have the sex addiction." What came next shocked even someone who thought she'd heard it all. He started with a childhood memory, masturbating for the first time at maybe 2 or 3 years old. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part came later. At 18, lonely and studying engineering in a foreign country, he decided to apply his technical skills to solve a problem. "A machine?" Dr. Lembke asked. "A masturbation machine," he confirmed. And then he described it with the precision of someone explaining a fascinating engineering project. A metal rod, a record player, an open coil, wrapped in soft fabric. He could dial the speed up or down, keeping himself suspended at the edge of climax for hours. "This," he said, nodding with what almost looked like admiration for his younger self, "very addictive." Now you might be thinking this is just a wild story, an outlier in the landscape of human weirdness. But according to Dr. Anna Lembke, a psychiatrist at Stanford and author of the groundbreaking book Dopamine Nation, this story isn't weird at all. Well, it's weird, but it's also deeply, profoundly important. Because Jacob's homemade pleasure machine is actually a perfect metaphor for the world we're all living in right now. We've all built our own machines. Maybe yours doesn't involve a record player, but it's there. Instagram, Netflix, DoorDash, online shopping, gaming, endless scrolling. We're all caught in this bizarre loop of chasing pleasure that somehow leaves us feeling more empty than before we started. Dopamine Nation has become something of a modern survival guide for millions of people trying to figure out why they feel so scattered and unsatisfied despite having more comfort and convenience than any generation in human history. And here's what makes Dr. Lembke's approach so powerful. She's not standing on some pedestal judging everyone else. She's right there in the trenches with us. She shares her own addiction story. And yes, she uses that word, to romance novels. It started innocently enough with Twilight. Who among us hasn't been there? But it spiraled. Soon she was blazing through cheap, formulaic erotica on her Kindle, hiding it from her family, sneaking chapters between patient sessions. The whole thing. Her journey, woven together with the gripping stories of her patients, reveals something fundamental about how our brains actually work. And that's what we're diving into today. By the time we're done, you'll understand the hidden mechanism in your brain that's running the show, controlling both your pleasure and your pain. It's surprisingly simple, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. More importantly, you'll walk away with actual, practical, science-backed strategies to break free from the cycle of compulsive consumption, reclaim your attention, and rediscover a deeper, more lasting kind of happiness in a world literally designed to keep you hooked. This isn't just about addiction in the traditional sense. This is about why you can't stop checking your phone, why that bag of chips somehow disappeared, and why, despite living in an age of unprecedented abundance, so many of us feel more anxious and miserable than ever. The path to balance, as Dr. Lembke shows us, lies in this unexpected fusion of cutting-edge neuroscience and the ancient wisdom of recovery. If we want to understand our modern world and why we're all feeling slightly unhinged, we need to start with one powerful chemical in your brain: dopamine. You've probably heard of it. People call it the pleasure molecule, but that's not quite right, and the distinction matters. Dr. Lembke clarifies that dopamine is actually better understood as the motivation molecule. It's the chemical of wanting, of desire, of that itch that makes you reach for your phone for the 40th time today. It drives us to get off the couch and pursue rewards: food, money, success, pleasure. Scientists actually use dopamine as a kind of universal measuring stick for how addictive something can be. The more dopamine something releases, and the faster it hits your system, the more potentially addictive it becomes. Let's look at some numbers to put this in perspective. A piece of chocolate might bump your baseline dopamine up about 55%. Nice little boost. Sex doubles it, 100% increase. Nicotine kicks it up to 150%. Cocaine, 225%. And then you've got amphetamine, the stuff in drugs like Adderall, which can rocket your dopamine levels up by a staggering 1,000%. For our ancestors living in a world of scarcity, hunting for their next meal, trying not to become something else's next meal, this system was brilliant. Dopamine motivated them to hunt, find a mate, protect their tribe. Their world was all about effort and occasional rewards. Our world? Complete opposite. We've transformed the entire planet from a place of scarcity into what Dr. Lembke calls an overwhelming abundance. As she puts it, the smartphone is the modern-day hypodermic needle, delivering digital dopamine 24/7 for a wired generation. We've got an endless supply of everything: drugs, food, news, gambling, shopping, gaming, social media, all at our fingertips all the time. And our brains, which evolved over millions of years for that world of scarcity, are simply not equipped for this. One of Dr. Lembke's colleagues who studies diabetes described it perfectly. We are cacti in the rainforest. Think about that. A cactus is beautifully adapted to thrive in the desert. Drop it in a rainforest and it drowns. That's us with dopamine. Which brings us to the most important concept in the entire book: the pleasure-pain balance. Imagine there's a seesaw in your brain. When you're just sitting around doing nothing particular, it's perfectly level. This is your baseline, your equilibrium. Now, when something pleasurable happens, you eat that chocolate, you get a like on your post, you win a hand in poker, the seesaw tips toward pleasure. Dopamine floods in, and you feel good. The more intense the pleasure and the faster it hits, the more dramatic the tip. Here's where it gets interesting. Your brain really doesn't like being off balance. It's constantly working to maintain what scientists call homeostasis, basically keeping things level and stable. So the instant your seesaw tips toward pleasure, your brain immediately goes into action to bring it back to center. Dr. Lembke imagines this as little gremlins hopping onto the opposite side of the seesaw, the pain side, to even things out. This is that subtle feeling you get when you're reaching for another cookie, even though you just ate one. That's the gremlins at work. But here's the kicker. They don't just bring the seesaw back to level. They've got momentum. They overshoot. The seesaw tips to the pain side. This is the after effect, the come down, the hangover, the craving. What goes up must come down, and then some. This is what scientists call the opponent process, but you can just think of it as the price of pleasure. Every pleasure has a cost, and that cost is a period of pain afterward. This is totally manageable with small, natural pleasures. You have a good meal, feel a slight dip afterward, then bounce back to baseline. But what happens when we start hammering our brains with high dopamine superpotent rewards over and over and over? The gremlins get smarter. They adapt. With repeated exposure to the same pleasure source, they learn to anticipate it. They start jumping on the pain side earlier and with more force. They get bigger, faster, more numerous. This process is called neuroadaptation, but you know it by a simpler name: tolerance. You need more of the substance or behavior to get the same effect. The first time you played that video game, it was incredible. The 100th time, meh. Dr. Lembke experienced this with her romance novels. The first time through Twilight, she was enchanted. The fourth time, the magic was gone. The pleasure becomes weaker and shorter. The painful after effect, the craving, the emptiness, the come down becomes stronger and longer. If you keep this up long enough, something genuinely scary happens. The gremlins don't just hop on the seesaw when you're chasing pleasure anymore. They decide to move in permanently. They set up camp on the pain side with air mattresses and portable grills. Your entire pleasure-pain balance, your baseline state of being, gets reweighted to the side of pain. This is what's called a dopamine deficit state. Now you're not using your drug of choice to feel good anymore. You're using it just to feel normal, just to get back to level. Nothing else brings pleasure. A beautiful sunset, a conversation with a friend, a good book. These simple joys can't even compete. They don't register. The paradox is devastating. The relentless pursuit of pleasure for its own sake ultimately leads to anhedonia, the complete inability to enjoy pleasure of any kind. This is the trap of addiction, and in our modern world, it's a trap set for absolutely everyone. Dr. Lembke tells the story of David, a college student who walked into student health services feeling anxious. He was afraid to speak up in class, worried about being exposed as not knowing enough. After a quick evaluation, he walked out with diagnoses of attention deficit disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, plus prescriptions for Adderall, a powerful stimulant, and Paxil, an antidepressant. The pills seemed like a miracle. As David put it, in the end it came down to comfort. It was easier to take a pill than feel the pain. This reflects something profound happening in our culture. We've started viewing any form of pain or discomfort as a pathology, something that needs to be eliminated immediately. We bubble wrap our children emotionally, terrified of traumatizing them. We hand out participation trophies, not for achievement, but just for showing up. We've become so obsessed with pursuing happiness and avoiding misery that we're actually making ourselves more miserable. David's story illustrates this perfectly. The Adderall helped him focus, sure. It also helped him procrastinate better. He'd use it to cram for exams, pulling all-nighters. Soon, he couldn't study without it. Then he needed more. His brain was adapting, the seesaw tipping. After graduation, he was working 15-hour days as a software developer, fueled entirely by Adderall. But then he was too wired to sleep. So back to the psychiatrist for Ambien, a sleeping pill. Then he needed Ativan for anxiety before big presentations. He was trapped in a chemical cycle of his own making, uppers to function during the day, downers to shut down at night. He called them his A vitamins: Adderall, Ambien, and Ativan. He genuinely believed he needed these pills to function, attributing his exhaustion and anxiety to his underlying disorders. But the truth was darker. The pills themselves were causing the very problems he was trying to treat. He was using drugs to compensate for basic self-care failures: poor sleep, overwork, no real coping strategies, and then blaming the consequences on mental illness, which justified taking even more drugs. As Dr. Lembke writes, poisons become vitamins. Eventually, David hit a wall. He started thinking about ending his life, but his wife was pregnant, and something in him knew he had to change. He asked her to take him to the hospital, where he was finally diagnosed not with a collection of disorders, but with addiction to his prescribed medications. David's story reveals something we all share. We're running from pain. Some of us use pills, some binge Netflix, some disappear into romance novels or video games or endless scrolling. We'll do almost anything to avoid sitting with ourselves. Yet the data shows this strategy isn't working. The United States, one of the wealthiest nations on Earth, has actually seen a decrease in self-reported happiness over the last decade. Richer countries have significantly higher rates of anxiety than poorer ones. We have more stuff, more comfort, more options than any generation in history. And we feel worse. So what's the way out? If relentless pleasure-seeking is the problem, what's the solution? Dr. Lembke argues that the path forward is found in the hard-won wisdom of people recovering from addiction. She's developed a simple, powerful framework anyone can use, easily remembered by the acronym dopamine. Let's walk through it using the story of Delilah, a teenager whose parents dragged her to Dr. Lembke's office because they thought she was smoking too much pot. Delilah had a different take. My problem is anxiety. I smoke because I'm anxious. D is for data. First step, get brutally honest about the facts. What are you using? How much? How often? Delilah wasn't just having the occasional joint. She was hitting a high-potency vape pen from the moment she woke up until she went to bed. O is for objectives. Why are you using it? What's it doing for you? For Delilah, cannabis was the only thing that works for my anxiety. This step isn't about judgment. It's about understanding the logic, however flawed, behind the behavior. P is for problems. What are the downsides, the unintended consequences? Delilah couldn't see any, except her parents nagging her. This is common. When we're deep in a compulsive behavior, our ability to see cause and effect gets cloudy. This brings us to the most crucial step. A is for abstinence. Dr. Lembke proposed an experiment to Delilah. Stop using cannabis completely for 1 month. This is what she calls a dopamine fast. The idea is simple. Give your brain enough time to reset its reward pathway. Let those gremlins hop off the pain side of the seesaw and go home. It takes roughly 4 weeks for the brain to restore homeostasis. Dr. Lembke explained that Delilah's anxiety might not be an underlying condition at all. It might be the result of a pleasure-pain balance chronically weighted to the pain side from constant cannabis use. The weed wasn't treating her anxiety. It was treating the withdrawal from her last dose. It had become the cause of her anxiety, not the cure. The only way to know for sure? Stop. M is for mindfulness. During this abstinence period, you need to prepare yourself. You'll feel worse before you feel better. All those painful thoughts and emotions you were escaping will come flooding back. Mindfulness is the practice of observing these feelings without judgment, of sitting with the discomfort instead of running from it. I is for insight. When Delilah came back a month later, she was transformed. My anxiety is gone, she said, eyes wide, gone. The first few days had been brutal. She felt sick, threw up, couldn't sleep. But realizing she was actually in withdrawal motivated her to push through. It was the first real evidence she had that she was addicted. After stopping, she could finally see clearly. The cannabis had been causing her anxiety, not curing it. This kind of clarifying insight is only possible after a period of abstinence. N is for next steps. What do you want to do now? Most people, even after feeling the benefits of abstinence, want to return to their drug of choice, but in a more moderate, controlled way. E is for experiment. This is where you venture back into the world with a reset balance and a plan to maintain it, whether that's continued abstinence or careful moderation. But how do we actually maintain that balance in a world constantly trying to tip our seesaw? Dr. Lembke introduces the concept of self-binding. This is the act of intentionally creating barriers between ourselves and our drug of choice. It's an open admission that willpower alone often isn't enough. The ancient Greek myth of Odysseus and the Sirens illustrates this perfectly. The Sirens' song was so intoxicating it lured sailors to crash their ships on the rocks. Odysseus knew he wouldn't be able to resist, so he ordered his men to plug their ears with beeswax and tie him to the mast of the ship. He bound himself while he was still thinking clearly before he heard the song. We can do the same thing. Dr. Lembke organizes self-binding into 3 categories. First, physical self-binding, creating literal physical distance. This means deleting the social media app from your phone, unplugging the TV and shoving it in a closet, using only cash instead of credit cards. For Dr. Lembke, it was getting rid of her Kindle to make it harder to access that endless stream of cheap erotica. Second, chronological self-binding, using time to limit consumption, making rules like, I only check social media on weekends, or no drinks before 5 p.m. Studies on rats show that those given unlimited access to cocaine will use it until they literally die. But rats given access for only 1 hour a day maintain a steady, non-escalating pattern of use. Limiting our window of consumption helps us avoid the compulsive spiral. Third, categorical self-binding, sorting your drug of choice into categories of what's allowed and what's off-limits. This is especially useful for things we can't eliminate completely, like food or smartphones. A person addicted to sports betting might have to give up not just betting, but also watching sports on TV and reading the sports section, because those are triggers. For Jacob, the man with the masturbation machine, it meant avoiding not just pornography, but anything that could activate what he called his addict mind, women's volleyball on TV, even seeing his own naked body in the mirror. Self-binding is powerful, but Dr. Lembke introduces an even more counterintuitive and potent tool for resetting our pleasure-pain balance, intentionally pressing on the pain side. This is the science of hormesis, the idea that small, manageable doses of painful or uncomfortable stimuli can actually make us stronger and healthier. Instead of chasing pleasure, we mindfully pursue pain. This sounds absolutely bonkers, but it works by leveraging the brain's own homeostatic mechanisms. When you press on the pain side of the seesaw, the gremlins don't have to do anything. In fact, your brain tries to counteract the pain by hopping on the pleasure side. The rebound effect is pleasure. And unlike the short-lived, expensive pleasure you get from pressing on the pleasure side, the pleasure that comes from pain is often more enduring and less addictive. The book shares the incredible story of Michael, a successful Silicon Valley entrepreneur who got into recovery from cocaine and alcohol. After he quit, he felt empty, a common experience when your brain is in a dopamine deficit state. Then, almost by accident, he discovered a new path. His tennis coach suggested he try a cold shower to stop sweating after a match. The cold shower was a little painful, Michael recalled, but only for seconds. When I got out, I felt surprisingly good, like I'd had a really good cup of coffee. Curious, he started researching cold water therapy and began taking ice baths every morning and evening. For the first 5 to 10 seconds, my body is screaming, "Stop, you're killing yourself." But I tell myself it's time limited, and it's worth it. Right after I get out, I feel high. It's exactly like a drug. Incredible. I feel great for hours. The science backs this up. One study showed that immersing people in cold water, around 57 degrees Fahrenheit, for an hour, increased their blood dopamine levels by 250%, and the effect lasted, remaining elevated for an hour after they got out. Exercise is another powerful example of a hormetic stressor. In the moment, it's literally toxic to our cells. But the long-term benefits for mood, anxiety, cognition, and sleep are more profound than any pill a doctor can prescribe. When we intentionally choose discomfort, a cold plunge, a brutal workout, a challenging conversation, we're resetting our pleasure-pain balance toward the pleasure side. We become more resilient to pain and more able to experience genuine pleasure from simple, everyday things. But perhaps the most powerful tool for finding balance isn't biochemical at all, it's social. It's what Dr. Lembke calls radical honesty. Addiction thrives in secrecy. The lies we tell to hide our behaviors create a double life that isolates us and fuels the cycle of shame and consumption. Radical honesty, telling the truth about things large and small, even when it's embarrassing or has real consequences, is the antidote. Dr. Lembke tells the story of Drake, a medical student who got a DUI after a party. His friend, who'd been in a similar situation, advised him to hire a lawyer and plead not guilty to get the charge reduced or dismissed. Drake paid a lawyer $5,000 and was coached to say just 2 words in court, "not guilty." But as he sat in the courthouse waiting for his name to be called, he remembered something his father had taught him as a child. It was always worse to lie. When the judge finally called his name and asked, "How do you plead?" Drake opened his mouth to say the scripted words. But he couldn't do it. Instead, he said, "Guilty." That single moment of painful honesty had massive consequences. Fines, mandatory classes, reporting the DUI on every residency application and medical license form for the rest of his career. It would have been so much easier to lie. But looking back, Drake believes that one act of truth-telling may have saved him from following his parents into a life of problem drinking. "I think telling the truth at that one crucial moment in my life may have put me on another path. I have no secrets." Telling the truth does several remarkable things. First, it makes us aware of our own behavior, pulling it out of that foggy, half-conscious state of denial. Second, it creates deep, intimate human connections. When we show our vulnerabilities, we don't push people away, we draw them closer. And that connection itself is a source of dopamine, but it's a healthy, sustainable kind. This leads to the final piece of the puzzle, pro-social shame. Shame is tricky. It can be incredibly destructive. When we're shamed and then cast out by our community, it deepens our isolation and actually fuels the behavior we're ashamed of. But Dr. Lembke argues there's a healthy pro-social kind of shame. This happens when our community responds to our transgression not by shunning us, but by holding us accountable while also offering acceptance, empathy, and a clear path to redemption. This is the model used by groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. There's no shame in admitting you have a problem. In fact, that honesty is celebrated. The shame comes from not trying to get better. This system of accountability, combined with compassion, leverages our deep, primal need to belong to the tribe. It tells us, "You've strayed, but you're still one of us. Here's what you need to do to make it right." In the end, all of these lessons, the dopamine fast, self-binding, pursuing pain, radical honesty, point to a single profound conclusion. Instead of trying to escape the world, we need to learn to immerse ourselves more fully in it. Dr. Lembke concludes with the story of Mohammed, a PhD student who struggled for years to control his cannabis use. One day, while hiking and agonizing over his cravings, he pointed his camera at a beetle sitting on a leaf and zoomed in. He became completely absorbed by its intricate details, the iridescent colors, the delicate antennae, the tiny hairs on its legs. As he forced himself to achieve perfect stillness to capture the image, his cravings for cannabis vanished. He'd discovered a strange, compelling world right in front of him that rivaled any world he could escape to with drugs. But this world was real. And it didn't come with a come-down. The secret to finding balance in our dopamine nation isn't to run from life, but to turn and face it, in all its messy complexity and discomfort. It's learning to stop, to pay attention, and to discover that the world right in front of us is actually more magical and awe-inspiring than any fleeting artificial high we could ever chase. Dopamine Nation is one of those rare books that feels less like reading and more like getting a diagnosis you didn't know you needed. Dr. Anna Lembke gives us the language to understand this pervasive feeling so many of us have. This sense of being overwhelmed, distracted, and vaguely dissatisfied, even when our lives are objectively better than ever before. The most powerful and genuinely life-changing idea in this book is the pleasure-pain balance. Once you see the world through this lens, you can't unsee it. You start noticing it everywhere. In how social media apps engineer intermittent rewards, in the hyper-palatable design of processed foods, in your own subtle urges to reach for distraction the instant you feel even a hint of boredom or discomfort. It's such a simple, elegant model that explains so much about modern human behavior. What makes Dr. Lembke's message so compelling is her deep compassion and her willingness to put herself in the story. She's not some detached expert wagging her finger at us from an ivory tower. She's a fellow human who tumbled down the rabbit hole of romance novels and had to claw her way back out. This vulnerability creates real trust and makes her advice feel not just credible, but actually achievable. The lessons from addiction recovery she shares aren't just for people we'd traditionally call addicts. They're for all of us living in this addictive world. The idea of a dopamine fast, taking a deliberate break from our compulsions, is such a powerful antidote to the constant stimulation of modern life. It's a way to let the noise quiet down so we can actually hear ourselves think again. But the most radical, and perhaps most important lesson, is the call to embrace pain. Our culture has become genuinely allergic to discomfort. We see pain as a sign that something's broken, something to be medicated away, distracted from, or eliminated at all costs. Dr. Lembke completely flips this narrative, showing us that voluntarily engaging with healthy forms of pain, like a cold shower, a tough workout, or a difficult but honest conversation, is actually the key to resetting our capacity for joy. It's a profound and deeply countercultural message, and it might just be the secret to actually thriving in the 21st century. So how can you start applying these ideas to your own life right now? Here are 3 simple experiments you can try. First, practice a mini dopamine fast. Choose one behavior that you feel has just a little too much control over you. Scrolling Instagram, playing a video game, eating sugary snacks, whatever it is. Commit to abstaining from it for just 24 hours. Don't try to fix anything or achieve anything. Just observe. Notice when the cravings pop up. What are you feeling in those moments? Boredom? Anxiety? Loneliness? The goal isn't to suffer, but to gather data about your own patterns. Second, try pressing on the pain side. just a tiny bit. Tomorrow morning, at the end of your normal shower, turn the water to cold for just 30 seconds. It'll be uncomfortable. Your body will scream at you to stop. But notice how you feel a few minutes after you get out. You might be genuinely surprised by the clarity and energy it gives you, a feeling that lasts way longer than the initial shock. And third, practice radical honesty in one small, low-stakes situation. Maybe it's admitting to a friend you forgot to do something you promised, without making an excuse. Maybe it's telling your parents the truth about where you were, even if it's uncomfortable. Notice the feeling of relief that comes from not having to maintain a lie. Notice how it might, surprisingly, bring you closer to that person, instead of pushing them away. These small acts are the beginning of reclaiming your balance. They're the first steps toward moving from a life of frantic, compulsive escape to one of mindful, intentional engagement. That was a summary of Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lembke. We've touched on the core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. It can show you the major cities and highways, but it can never replace the experience of actually walking those ancient streets, smelling the local food, feeling the sun on your skin. The real magic of this book happens in the quiet moments, when a particular patient's story or a simple phrase connects with something you've been feeling but couldn't quite name. This summary is here to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or resonated with a feeling you couldn't quite articulate, I really encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself and your daily life. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to keep exploring the ideas in life-changing books, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We release new summaries regularly, and by subscribing, you'll make sure you don't miss our next journey into another essential read. Let's keep learning and growing together.